Hey everyone, welcome back. My name is Mac, and today we're talking about why Elemental Shaman feels so wildly different in Midnight compared to where it was in The War Within. Truth be told, the actual identity of the spec has shifted, and most people that I talk to can feel something is off but can't quite put their finger on it. It's not as simple as we just lost some buttons or abilities, it's that we lost buttons that made the spec feel more consistent, and Blizzard didn't really give us anything back to fill that gap. So today I want to walk through what actually changed, why it feels so different, and where the spec actually sits in the meta right now. The short version of this is we went from a burst AoE monster to being a burst AoE funnel class, and that swap has a lot more consequences than it might sound like on paper. Let me first set the stage really quick on what Elemental looked like at the end of the War Within to give some context. Our single target was bad, our low target cleave was genuinely terrible, but our AoE was incredible and our burst was right up there with the best classes in the game. The two biggest talents holding the identity together then were Deeply Rooted Elements and Echoes of the Great Sundering. DRE gave us Ascendance procs throughout a fight, which meant our baseline damage was being augmented by those little bursts of value spread out between our actual cooldowns. Echoes of the Great Sundering, on the other hand, let us weave Elemental Blast and Earthquake together in AoE in a way that felt actually rewarding, because the buff was doing real work for our damage profile, all the while buffing our Earthquakes. And the funny thing about this whole thing is that even though we were technically a proc-based spec, the gameplay actually felt pretty consistent when you were playing it. You had a pretty good idea when you were going to get Ascendance procs, and even more so in the last season with the tier set. You knew your Elemental Blast and Earthquake weaving was going to pay off, and that proc layer kind of became the floor of your damage, not just the ceiling. Now in Midnight, here's where we landed. Our single target is actually pretty good, but our low target cleave remains pretty terrible. Our AoE is great, and our burst is also still amazing. On paper, that almost looks like an upgrade, right? Because our single target went up, and everything else remained mostly the same. But the way we get those numbers is completely different, and that's where the whole thing kind of falls apart. We lost Echoes and we lost DRE, and Blizzard didn't really give us anything to replace those two talents that were doing pretty much the majority of our baseline damage. So our cooldown damage is still huge because nothing really changed about that, but the floor underneath it got cut out. The result is what we have now with this bursting and then crashing problem. Anytime we hit Ascendance, our damage looks incredible. We push to the top of the meters, we look like a top tier spec, and everything feels great for about 15 seconds. Then, when Ascendance ends, we don't just come down to Earth, we come crashing down through the Earth into the dirt, somewhere significantly below the surface, and then we sit there again until Ascendance is back up. Then we burst back up into a respectable, albeit slightly lower spot on the meters, and then that whole cycle just repeats over and over again. In The War Within, the gaps between Ascendance windows was being filled with DRE procs and Echoes in Mythic Plus, which actually did a good chunk of your damage. But now those gaps are pretty much just dead air with some version of lightning spam and hoping that you get some procs. And it's not necessarily that the rotation between cooldowns is hard exactly, it's that nothing you do between your cooldowns really feels like it matters at all. Now here's the part that I find genuinely funny in a not so funny way. Even though Echoes of the Great Sundering was removed, we're still weaving Elemental Blast into our AoE rotation. But we're not doing it just for the bonus Earthquake damage anymore because that bonus is gone. We're doing it purely to keep our Elemental Blast buffs up, because those buffs are still doing a good chunk of our damage. But here's the part that bothers me if you don't already see it. There's nothing in your talent tree, nothing in your spellbook, and nothing in your class itself that would tell you you want to weave Elemental Blast into your AoE rotation. The only reason you know to do this is because some really good looking and funny guy on YouTube told you to do it, or because you're reading it in a Wowhead guide. Which is, frankly, a wild design choice in my opinion. The optimal AoE play is something that you can only learn from a guide written by someone like me. And look, I'm happy to be the guy to spread that information. It's part of what I do here, but it shouldn't be that way. That information should be obviously available through the class itself. And the funniest part about this is that this entire change was made in the name of simplicity. The whole point of removing Echoes of the Great Sundering and gutting add-on functionality was supposedly to make the spec cleaner and more approachable. But the older version was kind of actually simpler than it is now. It was Elemental Blast, Earthquake. Elemental Blast, Earthquake. Elemental Blast, Earthquake again. That's the entire rotation. At least outside of Chain Lightning. The new version is Elemental Blast, maintain your buffs, Earthquake. Check the buffs again, maybe Elemental Blast, maybe Earthquake, depending upon if a buff's about to fall off. So it's not as simple as a back and forth between the two spells anymore, it's actively tracking buff uptime on top of everything else you're doing, which is harder than what we had to do with Echoes, not easier. And to make it even better, we have to track these buffs with the most limiting tools we've had in years because Blizzard nuked the add-ons we used to track them in the first place. So the design philosophy was, let's simplify the spec and reduce reliance on add-ons, while the actual result was making the spec more complicated to play optimally with fewer tools to manage that complexity. I'm not sure how the math works out on the design side, but here we are. So this spec essentially holds us hostage to a few leftover mechanics from the previous expansion, except the mechanics don't actually exist anymore, and they really don't feel rewarding anymore. It feels clunky, it costs a lot of resources, and is just counterintuitive to what you would expect the class to be. One of the things I think people don't talk about enough is the skill floor mentality, right? In the War Within, Elemental was already a pretty high skill floor spec. You had to know your Ascendance window timings, you had to react to Ascendance DRE procs, you had to weave in Elemental Blast, Earthquake, Lava Burst, Master the Elements stuff, all that good stuff. But in Midnight, the skill floor kind of got a little bit higher, not because the rotation got more complex, rather it got higher because the optimal play at any given moment is no longer easily visible. In the War Within, if you had a deeply rooted Elements proc, you knew what to do. If you had a Master the Elements buff, you knew what to do. Now we are constantly making judgment calls about whether to weave another Elemental Blast in for buff upkeep, or dump it into an Earthquake, or whether to send Tempest into a priority target, or spread Lightning Rod, or any of these crazy options. And those calls aren't being made because the rotation is intentionally deep, they're being made because the spec doesn't really tell you what the right answer is anymore. We're effectively guessing and gambling what to do, and the difference between a good Elemental player and a great Elemental player right now is mostly just better reactions. This is why the value of content creators, not me, but players much better than me who are writing the guides, has gone up so much with this expansion. But the part that really I think is the most frustrating to me is just the general identity shift. Over the course of a dungeon, even with Ascendance windows and everything fitting perfectly, we're still pretty far behind actual meta classes most of the time. So the question then becomes, why are we even being brought to keys? And the answer is twofold. Mainly because of our burst, but also we have pretty dang good funnel now. Which is genuinely funny to me, because the War Within, we were just a burst AoE monster. That was our entire identity. Big AoE pulls, big numbers, top of the meters, bursting damage. That's what the spec did. But now we've shifted, not super far from that, but more so into a burst AoE funnel spec. Which means the thing the spec is actually valued for in Mythic Plus is not the massive AoE we're supposed to be really good at, or were good at. It's our ability to dump damage into a priority target through Lightning Rod and funneling Tempests. So we're being brought for the thing we have to actively choose to do at the expense of the thing that the spec used to be built around. You enjoyed massive AoE? Cool, so do I. But to be actually useful in higher keys, you should be funneling the majority of that damage into a priority target, which technically lowers your overall damage even more than it already is. It's not a complete identity flip because it's very similar, but it's something that I don't think a lot of players have fully adjusted to yet, and something Blizzard never really made obvious to us. The spec didn't have a new design philosophy or explanation behind it, it just had pieces removed or changed until this is what was left. And I'm not even going to get into the Apex talent situation, but I have to at least mention it. The Apex talents are supposed to be the defining feature of Midnight, the expansion level system that ties into every spec and is super cool and awesome. And for Farseer, the other hero talent tree, the one of two hero talent trees we have, it doesn't interact with our Apex talents at all in any meaningful way. Imagine that, a class that actually interacts with the expansion defining feature. It's a wild concept, I know. But we've already talked about that enough. But let's wrap this up by talking about why it feels so janky, because when you start to pull it all together, the picture starts to make sense. We lost the talents that made our baseline damage consistent. We kept the awkward AoE weaving, but lost the real reward for doing it. Our identity shifted from burst AoE to burst AoE funnel without anyone really acknowledging it. The skill floor kinda went up because the right answer in any given moment got less clear. And one of our two hero talent options doesn't even fully interact with the expansion's headline system. That's why the spec feels so janky right now. It's not one thing, it's kind of a cumulative effect of every one of those things kind of stacking on top of each other. And it's also not that Elemental is unplayable either. It's not. It's still a great class, the burst's still there, the funnel is real, and a skilled player can absolutely make this spec work really well in high keys. It's just that the spec we have in Midnight is noticeably worse in my opinion. It's a more confusing version of what we had in the War Within, and I think it's fair to be frustrated about that. The short version of all this is that Elemental playstyle changed in Midnight because Blizzard pulled out the consistency pieces and left the burst pieces, then quietly kind of shifted us into a funnel spec. The fix, in my opinion, is not even necessarily a fix, but give us something back to fill the gap that deeply rooted elements and echoes left behind. Make AoE weaving feel actually rewarding, and please, for the love of God, make Farseer interact with our Apex talents. You can even nerf Ascendance to make up for the damage difference here, because honestly, that 2 or 3 minute cooldown of Ascendance, which is, by the way, one of the longest CDs in damage dealers in the game, just feels so damn boring to play when you're outside of your cooldown windows. None of those are asking for the world, but until any of it happens, we're kind of stuck riding this weird bursting, crashing playstyle and pretending like it was Blizzard's plan all along, which we all know it wasn't. Anyways, that's my rant over. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like the video. It really does help the channel a lot. And if you want more Elemental or general WoW content, make sure to subscribe as well. Also, I've been streaming over on Twitch every Tuesday, Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern, so if you want to hang out, ask questions, or just watch while I raid or do keys, feel free to stop by and say hello. And if you want to support the channel a little bit more directly, I've got a Patreon link below where I offer coaching and additional content, along with a Discord where you can talk about the spec, ask questions, or just hang out with the community. But yeah, that's all I got for this one, so thank you all very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and as always, I will see you in the next one.